They say you can tell everything about a person by who shows up at their funeral. But what happens when no one comes at all? When the casket sits alone, when the preacher's words echo off empty pews, when the only people present are the ones getting paid to be there, what does that say about the life that was lived? Or perhaps the truth that was buried along with it? Today, I'm going to take you deep into a story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about kindness, loneliness, and the secrets that hide behind a gentle smile. You clicked on this video because the title tugged at something inside you, and I promise, before we're done, you'll have the answer you came for. But the truth? It's not what you think. Let's talk. Not just as a narrator and a viewer, but like two people who know how the world can be, how it can chew people up and spit them out, especially the quiet ones. You ever notice how the people who give the most are often the ones taken for granted? How they're always there for everyone else but vanish when it's their turn to ask for help? That's where our story begins, with a woman like that. Her name was Elaine Morgan, 63 years old, retired nurse, spent her life caring for others. A woman whose hands had held more dying patients than most of us have ever spoken to. And yet, when she passed away quietly in her small Missouri home, not a single soul showed up to say goodbye. Not family, not friends, no neighbors, no coworkers, no church group, nothing. Just a closed casket, a confused funeral director, and a single obituary written by a social worker who barely knew her. But here's where it gets strange, and I mean really strange. Because this wasn't just some forgotten recluse. Elaine wasn't invisible. She had photos on her walls of birthdays she planned, babies she helped deliver, weddings she attended. People knew her. People loved her. So, why didn't any of them come? That's what pulled me in. And that's what I want you to hold on to as we move through this story. Because the more I dug, the more I realized, this isn't just about one woman's lonely death. It's about how easy it is to disappear in a world that's too busy to notice. So if you're watching this while folding laundry, scrolling on your phone, or half distracted, pause. Focus in. Give this your full attention. Because I guarantee you, by the end of this video, you're going to remember the name Elaine Morgan. You're going to feel something real. And you're going to see how sometimes the people who seem the most ordinary are carrying the darkest truths. Now let me paint the picture for you. Elaine lived in a quiet residential neighborhood outside of Jefferson City, Missouri. It was one of those places where everyone waves from their porch, lawns are neatly trimmed, and secrets stay behind closed doors. She bought her house in 1992 after working over 20 years as a nurse in hospice care. You know what kind of hard it takes to do that job day in and day out? To hold people's hands as they take their final breaths, to clean their wounds, to sit with families while they fall apart? That was Elaine. She was the type who'd drive out of her way to bring someone soup, the kind who never forgot a birthday. People described her as a saint. Too good for this world, some said. But here's the thing, saints don't usually die alone. And saints don't usually end up as the center of a mystery like this. When the police were finally called to do a welfare check, it had been over a week since anyone heard from her. The mailbox was full, the curtains drawn, the front porch untouched. Inside, they found her sitting peacefully in her recliner, TV still playing softly, a blanket pulled up around her shoulders. It looked like she had just fallen asleep. No signs of foul play, no mess, just quiet. But something didn't sit right. The officer on the scene later admitted it gave him chills. Not because of how she died, but because of how clearly no one cared. And that's where this story turns. Because it would have been easy to just chalk Elaine's death up to one of those tragic, modern realities, an elderly woman forgotten by society. But there was more. A lot more. As officials started trying to locate her next of kin, they ran into roadblock after roadblock. The phone numbers in her address book were disconnected. The names? Untraceable. Her will was updated just 3 months before her death, but left everything to a local animal shelter. No mention of family. No emergency contacts. And when they pulled her hospital employment records, they found something bizarre. She had listed the same emergency contact, Rita Hanley, for over 20 years. But Rita had died in 2003. Even more confusing, Elaine had continued writing checks to a caregiver named Lena Ray until the week of her death. But when they tried to find Lena, there was no trace. No ID. No address. No tax records. It was like she never existed. So who was this mysterious woman Elaine trusted? Was she real? Or was she covering up something darker? And why did Elaine go to such lengths to erase herself in those final years? You see where I'm going? This wasn't just about loneliness anymore. It was about something deliberate. And that's when I knew we weren't looking at a forgotten woman. We were looking at someone who'd made herself disappear. And here's where you come in. Because everything I'm about to show you in this video, every phone call, every hidden document, every testimony from people who used to know her, builds a case that's going to flip this entire story upside down. Elaine's life wasn't what it seemed. And her death, it may not have been natural at all. Stick with me because in the next few minutes, we'll dig into her past, her job at the state hospital, a tragedy in 1998 that changed her forever, and a series of bizarre, unexplained deaths that followed her across 3 counties. We'll talk to the one neighbor who did remember something strange. And we'll confront a painful question. Was Elaine a victim of a broken system, or was she hiding from justice all along? Don't look away. Don't skip. Because this isn't just a story. It's a mirror. How many Elaines are out there right now? People who gave their lives to helping others, only to vanish without a trace. And how often do we fail to notice the signs until it's too late? You're going to want to hear what we found in her attic, what we discovered in her bank statements, and what a retired detective said when we showed him Elaine's photo. This story isn't just about solving a mystery, it's about seeing the invisible. And by the end of this, I guarantee you'll never look at your quiet neighbor the same way again. But before we get to the shocking twist that made even seasoned investigators take a step back, let me tell you about the last person who claims to have seen Elaine alive, because what he remembers changes everything. The last person who claimed to have seen Elaine Morgan alive was a delivery driver named Marcus Bell, a 29-year-old part-timer who worked for a local grocery chain. According to his statement, he'd been dropping off Elaine's groceries every Thursday afternoon for the past 6 months. He described her as kind, soft-spoken, a little distant but always polite. She always wore the same light blue cardigan, even on warm days. She'd leave him a tip in a small white envelope with his name handwritten in careful, cursive script. She was the type of old lady you don't forget, Marcus said. Like someone's grandmother, but quieter, more watchful. When police showed him a photo of Elaine from the 90s, smiling in a nurse's uniform, arm around a patient, he said, she looked happier back then. But what disturbed him wasn't the change in her appearance. It was what she said to him the last time he saw her. Next week might be someone else, she'd told him, her voice barely a whisper. Tell them to knock twice, not once. It sounded like nothing at the time. But now? It feels like a message hidden in plain sight. What's even more unsettling is that there wasn't another delivery the following week. The order had been placed, but never finalized. Her card was declined, which triggered a flag in the system, and that's what eventually led to the welfare check. That alone might not raise eyebrows, but when investigators pulled her recent credit card activity, the mystery deepened. In the 6 weeks before her death, Elaine had made nearly a dozen purchases from obscure websites, mostly burner phone SIM cards, untraceable USB drives, and prepaid money orders. Not typical behavior for a retired nurse living on a modest pension. It raised a haunting possibility. Was Elaine afraid of someone? Was she planning an escape? Or was she helping someone else disappear? Elaine's home, though modest, was meticulously organized. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of self-harm or poison. Toxicology came back clean. Her medical records, surprisingly current for someone her age, showed regular visits to a local clinic, but not one doctor remembered her clearly. Just a few notes, vitals, and one peculiar observation. In her final appointment, she refused a routine blood draw, claiming she didn't trust the system anymore. That was 6 weeks before she died. She never returned. Neighbors offered little help. Most described her as sweet but reclusive. One elderly man, Harold Kimball, said he occasionally waved at her from across the street. She never came to neighborhood meetings, he recalled. She'd leave her trash cans out just a little too long. You know, the small things you notice when someone doesn't quite fit in. But Harold did remember one odd incident. About a month before her death, he saw a dark SUV idling in front of her house for nearly an hour. No plates on the front. Tinted windows. I thought it was a government car, Harold said. Or maybe private security. It just sat there. She never came out. There's another thread, one that might seem unrelated, but when dealing with cases like this, nothing is truly random. A missing persons report from 2004 resurfaced during the investigation. The name on the report? Jason Hanley. Age: 27. Last known location: Jefferson City General Hospital. Jason had been admitted for a psychological evaluation after a suspected breakdown. He left the facility without being formally discharged and was never seen again. The only emergency contact listed in his file was Elaine Morgan. But here's where it gets strange. Elaine never mentioned him to anyone. Not in journals, not in paperwork, not in conversations with friends. Was he a patient? A family member? A secret? The detectives couldn't ignore the coincidence. Digging deeper, they uncovered a connection that had been buried for years. Back in the late 90s, there was an internal investigation at the hospital where Elaine worked. A patient had died under suspicious circumstances. Jason, Hanley's roommate. No charges were ever filed, and the incident was quickly covered up, labeled as natural causes. But according to a confidential whistleblower report, there were allegations of negligence, unprescribed medications, and forged signatures. Elaine's name appeared in the report, not as the accused, but as someone who might have witnessed inappropriate conduct. Her official statement? I do not recall the incident. The report was sealed. The hospital went silent. The patient's family was paid a settlement, and the case disappeared from public record. Why would someone who dedicated their life to caring for others be connected to so much silence and secrecy? Was she protecting someone? Covering something up? Or was she being silenced herself? The deeper the investigators looked, the more tangled Elaine's life became. There were inconsistencies in her employment history, gaps in her resume that didn't line up with tax records. 2 separate driver's licenses were found in her house, both under her name but with different middle initials. And then there was the box. A metal lockbox tucked away behind a false panel in her closet, hidden beneath stacks of neatly folded linens. Inside was a collection of items that no one could quite explain: an old Polaroid of a child no one could identify, a blood-stained scarf wrapped in plastic, and a newspaper clipping about a fire in a Kansas City nursing home dated April 2001, an incident in which 6 people died, including one man who was suspected of abusing patients, but never formally charged. The article had one name circled in red ink: Lena Ray, staff nurse. But no one could find any record of a Lena Ray ever working at that facility. And as mentioned before, Lena was also the name of the supposed caregiver receiving payments from Elaine just before her death. Was Lena Ray a real person? An alias? Or just a ghost, stitched into Elaine's life like a patch over something she didn't want seen? That's where the red herrings begin to pile up. Every answer leads to more questions. Every piece of evidence splits into 2 possibilities. Did Elaine lose someone close to her in that fire and spend her life trying to piece it back together? Or was she involved in what happened there, running ever since from a past that threatened to surface? Is Lena Ray a phantom figure Elaine invented to live out a narrative only she understood? Or was someone else using that name to manipulate her? And if so, why? A new theory began to emerge, one that no one wanted to believe. What if Elaine wasn't just the kindly nurse who vanished into a lonely grave? What if she was involved in something darker, something carefully hidden behind years of good deeds and polite smiles? What if the loneliness was part of the design, not the result? Yet nothing about Elaine suggested cruelty. No criminal history. No complaints filed against her during her career. People who knew her, even briefly, described her as gentle and quiet. And still, those who worked the case couldn't shake the feeling that everything had been deliberate, that she had crafted a life not to be lived, but to be erased. And if so, the question becomes, from what? And that brings us to the one item in Elaine's possession that might hold the key to everything, a VHS tape with no label, found hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her bedroom. Investigators haven't disclosed what's on it. They're waiting on forensic analysis. But one officer, speaking anonymously, said, "It's the kind of thing that changes the whole picture." Whatever was on that tape, Elaine didn't want it found. But she also didn't destroy it. That choice, leaving something behind, suggests she wanted the truth to come out. Eventually. Maybe not during her life. Maybe not until long after. But now that she's gone, it's up to us to find out why. Because someone took care of everyone, and no one came to say goodbye. Just when it seemed like the investigation was finally gathering momentum, everything took a sudden and unsettling turn. The VHS tape, the one item that might have unraveled Elaine Morgan's shadowy past, was gone. Not stolen from the evidence locker, not destroyed, but missing, as if it had never existed in the first place. The detective who logged it into evidence, Officer Ramirez, swore she followed proper protocol. There was a record of it being submitted, a timestamp, even her initials in the evidence chain. But when the team returned to review the contents, the tape was no longer there. The case file had been updated to say, pending review, yet the physical evidence, one of the most critical leads, had vanished without a trace. No signs of forced entry. No surveillance footage. Just an eerie silence in the place where answers should have been. That's when the anonymous email came in. It was addressed to the lead investigator and simply read, "Stop looking. She was never yours to find." Attached was a grainy still image, taken from what looked like a home security camera. The image showed someone in a dark hoodie, gloved hands, standing outside Elaine's house 2 nights before the welfare check. The timestamp was 3:42 a.m. The face was obscured, but the intent was chilling. They weren't trying to break in. They were watching. Waiting. Almost like they knew what was coming. Or worse, like they had already been inside. Adding to the confusion, an old colleague of Elaine's stepped forward, one who had remained quiet for years. Her name was Barbara Leclerc, a retired hospice nurse, now living in Florida. She had seen the story on a trending true crime YouTube channel and felt compelled to speak. According to Barbara, Elaine wasn't just a nurse. She had briefly worked in a classified government medical facility during the early 2000s. The facility, Barbara claimed, specialized in the long-term care of patients deemed psychologically compromised due to exposure to traumatic national security events. It sounded like conspiracy theory at first, but when pressed, Barbara gave a name, Site 27B. The location was redacted in most known government records. The few scraps available online were buried deep. Rumors of mental experiments, forced treatments, and patients who were never meant to leave. And Elaine? She wasn't just staff. She was a whistleblower. Or, at least she tried to be. That revelation shifted the entire investigation. What if Elaine's recent purchases weren't paranoia, but preparation? What if those SIM cards and burner phones were meant to communicate with someone still in hiding, someone from her past she had once promised to protect? Suddenly, Elaine's behavior wasn't erratic, it was strategic. Every envelope, every locked drawer, every canceled appointment. She hadn't lost control, she'd been trying to regain it. But just as detectives prepared to pursue that lead, Barbara Leclerc went silent. She didn't answer her phone. She didn't return emails. And within a week, her apartment was found empty. Rent unpaid. Utilities cut. She had vanished. All that remained was a yellowed photo left on her front porch, showing Elaine and Barbara as young nurses, laughing, arms around each other. Scribbled on the back in red ink were the words, "We only thought we could escape." This prompted law enforcement to re-interview Elaine's remaining acquaintances, hoping to identify anyone else from her past who could offer insight. One name repeatedly surfaced, Joseph Carter, a handyman who had done odd jobs for Elaine over the years. He had installed her security lights, fixed a roof, and helped her install a reinforced bolt on the inside of her bedroom door. He seemed harmless, polite, almost too invisible. But his answers didn't quite line up. When asked when he last saw Elaine, he claimed it was mid-June. But phone records showed a call between them on July 3rd. When confronted, he changed his story. "Must have slipped my mind," he said. "Doesn't matter now, right?" But it does matter. Because neighbors saw his truck parked outside Elaine's home the night before she was discovered dead. And even more suspicious, the reinforced bolt on her bedroom door, the one he installed, had been removed. Not kicked in, not broken. Unscrewed neatly, piece by piece. Joseph Carter wasn't just someone she hired. He was someone she trusted. And maybe that trust was misplaced. Still, no direct link tied him to her death. He had no criminal history. No known aliases. But something felt off. And then came the breaking point. A package arrived at the police station addressed to "Whoever Still Cares." Inside was an unmarked flash drive. The contents were heavily encrypted, but forensic analysts managed to retrieve fragments, short clips of what appeared to be interviews. Patients sitting in dark rooms, recounting events in calm, monotone voices. One man described being held underground. Another talked about being shown the same images repeatedly until he forgot his own name. And in one blurry frame, a voice, female, weary, asks, "Do you remember what happened to Jason?" The name hit investigators like a gut punch. Jason Hanley. The man connected to Elaine. The man who vanished. Was this evidence that he'd been alive and possibly held against his will? Or was it some elaborate psychological manipulation? None of it made sense. Every step forward led them down another hallway of locked doors and whispered warnings. And yet, something larger loomed. Something unspoken that tied Elaine, Barbara, Jason, and maybe even Joseph Carter into a single, sinister thread. It wasn't just about a mysterious death or an elderly woman's secrets. It was about something hidden long before Elaine's final breath. And just as the investigators thought they were closing in on the truth, one final blow landed. The lead detective on the case, Detective Eliza Monroe, was placed on administrative leave. No reason given. Just a sealed internal memo and whispers of conflict of interest. But what could she have possibly done wrong? Unless, of course, she wasn't just investigating the cover-up. She was part of it. And now, no one's sure who can be trusted anymore. Just when it seemed like the investigation had hit a bureaucratic wall with Detective Eliza Monroe's unexplained removal, a new thread unraveled that no one was prepared for. Roughly 5 days after Monroe was forced off the case, another person connected to Elaine Morgan received a message that sent a jolt of panic through everyone involved. It came to Lena, Elaine's estranged niece, who lived just outside Tacoma, Washington. They hadn't spoken in over 6 years. Not since a family argument over inheritance drove a wedge between them, but Lena had always quietly kept tabs on her aunt. She felt guilty for staying away. When news of Elaine's mysterious death broke online and on YouTube crime channels, Lena avoided the story. Not because she didn't care, but because it cut too deep. But that changed when she received a thick manila envelope in her mailbox. No return address, no stamps, just placed there by hand. Inside was a single page torn from an old journal, soaked at the edges, as if it had been submerged in water. The writing, barely legible, was in Elaine's handwriting. "They're not finished with me. If you're reading this, protect the black box. You'll know where to look." There was also a faded Polaroid of a young woman sitting in front of what looked like a control panel with blinking lights, wearing a visitor's badge labeled Classified Site, 27B. Her face was scratched out, but the initials EM were written on the back. Lena, shaken, contacted the local authorities who quickly routed the envelope to the same team originally handling Elaine's case. But by the time it reached the precinct, half the page had turned to mush, unreadable, and the photo had somehow warped, almost as if it had been exposed to heat. Evidence was again evaporating right before their eyes. Still, Lena's involvement reignited the case's momentum and provided a possible new angle, the black box mentioned in the note. Was it a literal recording device? A code name? A storage unit? Investigators tried tracing bank records, safety deposit boxes, even rental spaces Elaine might have secured, but nothing showed up under her name. However, A deeper dive revealed a peculiar payment made from Elaine's account to a private mailbox service in Idaho under a pseudonym, Mary R. Lind. Cross-referencing the alias with old employment records from the medical facility Elaine worked at years ago showed that Mary Lind had been a registered alias used by whistleblowers in cases involving sealed federal investigations. It wasn't a name, it was a signal. A warning. But before Lena could travel to Idaho to pursue the lead, someone slashed her tires in her apartment complex parking lot. Her car alarm had gone off briefly, but by the time she made it outside, the lot was empty, and the damage was done. The message was loud and clear: stay away. What made it worse was the fact that her building's surveillance cameras had been disabled earlier that evening, intentionally, by someone who knew the system. At this point, the story broke onto YouTube's trending Unsolved Mystery playlists again, picking up momentum as viewers started connecting dots, posting theories, and dissecting screenshots from police pressers. True crime enthusiasts debated whether this was a domestic cover-up, a botched government secret, or something even darker, involving psychological experimentation and erased identities. Theories ranged from Black Ops projects to long-forgotten Cold War experiments, but the only thing everyone agreed on was this: Elaine had discovered something she was never supposed to know, and she spent the final years of her life trying to hide the truth in plain sight. The more Lena uncovered, the less she felt like she was simply a grieving niece. She began to realize her aunt had left behind not just clues, but traps. Every breadcrumb she followed led to a dead end, and sometimes to someone else getting hurt. She spoke to an old neighbor of Elaine's, Mr. Tanner's, a Vietnam veteran and amateur radio operator, who mentioned strange sounds coming from Elaine's home in the weeks before her death. Static bursts, coded sequences, and on one occasion, a repeating voice saying, "They can't hear me. Turn off the lights." He thought she was just losing her mind. Now, he wasn't so sure. Then came the biggest contradiction yet. An internal leak from the medical facility, anonymously submitted to a crime-focused podcast, revealed a confidential report filed under Elaine's name, but not as an employee, as a patient. Dated April 2007. The record suggested that Elaine had undergone psychiatric evaluation and was listed as part of a long-term observation program after reportedly suffering from hallucinatory episodes following exposure to secured data. But that made no sense. At that time, Elaine was still working, still sending postcards to Lena, still volunteering at the local food pantry. She was lucid functioning, even leading community health seminars. Could it be an identity swap? A planted record? Or was Elaine playing a dual role, part of the very system she tried to dismantle? Lena pressed on, but the more she questioned people, the more silent they became. One former nurse who had worked under Elaine refused to speak, later found to have deleted all her social media accounts and moved without notice. A storage unit registered under another alias linked to Elaine mysteriously burned down in what fire marshals deemed accidental electrical fault. Lena was unraveling. Days had blurred into nights, and reality no longer obeyed the rules she once trusted. Every wall in her apartment was now covered in notes, string maps, and digital printouts of corrupted metadata, her world reduced to symbols, fragments, and theories. She was losing sleep, losing weight, and beginning to question not just the story she was chasing, but the very memories she was building it from. Still, she pushed forward, convinced that somewhere buried beneath the chaos was the truth she was meant to uncover. But it all came crashing down the moment she confronted the one person she thought she could rely on, her late sister Elaine's therapist, Dr. Marcus Reeve. Dr. Reeve had always been cagey with information, citing confidentiality and legal red tape, but he'd offered Lena just enough guidance to keep her from spiraling. It was his suggestion to search Elaine's personal effects for cognitive dissonance triggers, the same suggestion that led her to find the damaged USB drive and the first breadcrumb trail toward Site 27B. Lena had begged him for answers, for access to Elaine's final session notes, and when he finally relented and agreed to meet her in person, she thought she was finally making progress. What she wasn't expecting was the expression on his face when she handed him a printed still from the corrupted video file, the one with the blurry reflection in the mirror behind Elaine. Reeve stared at it longer than necessary, then carefully folded the image and slipped it into his coat. "This session never existed," he said softly, eyes clouded with something darker than secrecy. "Because Elaine didn't attend it." "You did." Lena laughed at first, thinking he was playing with her out of concern for her mental health, but he didn't smile. "We've sat across from each other multiple times. You spoke about the noise, the mirrors, the memory gaps. I didn't press because I thought it was a trauma projection, classic substitution delusion." He stood, voice tightening. "But this, you shouldn't remember this. That video should have been erased when the facility shut down." That word again, facility. She demanded answers, but Reeve wouldn't meet her eyes anymore. "They said you were one of the few who responded to the memory reshaping process. That you integrated well." His voice lowered to a whisper, as if terrified someone was listening. But maybe they were wrong. Lena stumbled out of his office and into the rain, her chest caving in with panic. None of it made sense. Or maybe it did. And that was the terrifying part. Her memories, the story she told herself for years about who she was, who Elaine was, and why she was even chasing this trail, it was all suspect. She had vague flashes now of waking up in a white room with humming lights overhead and voices behind glass. Faces she couldn't place. Needles. A voice repeating her name, again and again, like a command. In the following days, more inconsistencies surfaced. The video of Elaine's last known appearance was removed from the police database entirely, vanished. Lena's own birth certificate had a revision date stamped in the bottom corner from just 4 years ago. Her social security number traced back to a hospital in Utah she'd never visited. When she called Tommy's old number again, someone finally answered. It wasn't Tommy. It was a woman. She claimed to have never heard of Lena. "This number's been mine for 7 years," she said, then hung up before Lena could respond. As her grip on the narrative loosened, so did the boundary between what she'd uncovered and what might have been planted. Maybe she wasn't the seeker. Maybe she was the distraction. The deeper she dug, the more she found breadcrumbs that seemed too convenient, too perfectly placed, like someone wanted her to discover them, to follow a script written long before she knew she was part of the play. The final blow came when she accessed an old voicemail backup from her cloud account, files she hadn't listened to in months. There, buried in a forgotten folder, was a message marked as deleted. It was Elaine's voice. But it wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. "Come." Measured. Like she was in on something Lena wasn't. "If you're hearing this," Elaine said, "it means the timeline held. You'll feel like you're going mad. That's normal. You were never supposed to remember who you were before this. But if you do, find Dr. Hawthorne. He was the last one who fought for us. But don't trust Reeve. He was never on our side." Lena dropped the phone. Her knees gave out, and she slid to the floor of her kitchen, the weight of the betrayal hitting her like a train. She'd trusted Reeve. She'd needed him. But Elaine had warned her, and somehow, long before her disappearance, she had known Lena would be in this exact moment, hearing those exact words. That meant one thing. Everything Lena had uncovered was a controlled burn. A pre-designed trail. A psychological test. And now, she wasn't even sure she had passed it. But there was one name she had never heard before. Dr. Hawthorne. A new player had entered the game. One she didn't know, one she hadn't researched, and one that wasn't part of the neat little narrative that had been handed to her. And that could mean only one thing. The real story hadn't started yet. Let me know when you're ready to dive into the next phase, where the narrative fractures entirely, the true scope of the conspiracy begins to emerge, and Lena is forced to confront what she might have done before she became herself. Escalate the conflict even further by making the main character face impossible choices. Maybe they must confront someone close to them about their involvement. Or they're given an ultimatum that forces them to decide between their safety and the truth. Introduce emotional weight to make the audience feel connected to their struggles. Keep the tension high, and avoid resolving any major plot points yet. The story should feel real, intense, and unpredictable. Maintain a natural storytelling flow, using large paragraphs only, without small sentences or one-liners. Write the content by targeting US audience. Use the keywords which are trending on YouTube search. The rain hadn't let up in days, a constant cold drizzle that blurred city lights and soaked through Lena's bones no matter how many layers she wore. Her reflection in passing windows looked foreign now. Haunted eyes, hollow cheeks, the tentative posture of someone who no longer knew what ground was solid beneath them. But the weather was the least of her concerns. The voicemail from Elaine had upended everything she thought she knew, and the name Dr. Hawthorne was a thread she couldn't afford to ignore. She had no choice but to dig deeper, even if every step forward felt like wading into a trap she couldn't see. But it wasn't Hawthorne she found first, it was Caleb, her best friend, confidant, and the only person who had stood by her side since this nightmare began. She hadn't seen him in days, and her texts had gone unanswered. When he finally showed up at her apartment, drenched and breathless, he didn't come empty-handed. He brought a file. An old one, government-stamped and partially burned around the edges like someone had tried to destroy it. Inside were records of a clinical trial called Echo Project, dated back nearly 2 decades. And there it was on the last page, Patient 027B. Lena's photo. Young, maybe 12 or 13, eyes wide with fear, restrained in a hospital bed. Her own handwriting beneath it, scrawled across a crumpled intake form. I don't want to forget anymore. She stared at it for a long time before speaking. Where did you get this? She asked. Caleb didn't answer right away. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between regret and restraint. You weren't supposed to find out like this, he finally said. I was told to protect you, that if you remembered too fast, it could break you. His voice cracked. But I didn't think it would go this far. Lena felt her knees go weak. She gripped the counter for balance, shaking her head as 1,000 questions boiled over. You knew? This entire time. The betrayal was like a punch to the gut. All this time I thought you were helping me, and you were what, babysitting me? Making sure I didn't look too close? I was trying to keep you alive. Caleb snapped, his voice louder than she'd ever heard it. You don't understand what they'll do if you keep going. People like Reeve, the ones running this, they don't just erase memories, Lena. They erase people. His eyes softened, full of an emotion Lena couldn't yet name. I've lost others before. I wasn't going to lose you. It should have meant something. His fear, his confession, his desperate attempt to protect her. But Lena couldn't feel anything except rage. He had stood beside her at Elaine's funeral, held her hand when she cried, encouraged her to fight for answers. And now, she didn't know if any of it had been real. So what now? She asked coldly. You try to talk me out of this again? Tell me to walk away, before I become another redacted file. Caleb didn't answer with words. He reached into his coat and handed her a burner phone. Dr. Hawthorne. He'll only meet you if you use this number. But you'll need to choose Lena. If you call him, there's no turning back. No more protection. No more safety net. Once you go down this road, they'll come for you and everyone around you. He took a step closer, his voice breaking. Or you can walk away right now. I'll take you somewhere safe. Change your name. New life. Clean slate. You never have to feel this pain again. It was the cruelest kind of ultimatum. One path led to the unknown, to more danger, more lies, and the risk that she might uncover something too awful to live with. The other path offered peace, a way out, but one paved with silence, shadows, and the death of everything she believed in. Her heart screamed for truth, but her instincts begged her to survive. She turned away from him, staring at the burner phone like it might explode in her hands. Somewhere in the city, someone had the answers. Dr. Hawthorne, whoever he really was, had been part of a cover-up so elaborate it had rewritten her identity, her past, maybe even Elaine's death. But trusting Caleb now felt like swallowing glass. He had lied, yes, but maybe out of love. Or maybe out of fear. And maybe he wasn't alone in watching her. Later that night, unable to sleep, Lena opened the burner and typed in the number. Her thumb hovered over the call button, trembling. Then she noticed something. A second contact saved in the phone under a code name, Observer 4. She opened it. A video file autoplayed. It was security footage. Grainy. Black and white. A hallway she didn't recognize. A door opening. Caleb stepping through it, handing a manila envelope to someone who looked eerily like Dr. Reeve. The timestamp was from 2 days ago. The choice no longer felt theoretical. It was real. And Lena was starting to realize that maybe the real experiment wasn't about memory, it was about control. Let me know when you're ready for the next chapter, where the true cost of truth becomes undeniable, and Lena is forced to decide just how far she's willing to go to break the system that created her. The room felt like it was shrinking, the walls pressing in with every new realization. Lena sat frozen, the dim glow from the burner phone casting shadows across her face. The video footage of Caleb meeting Dr. Reeve played over and over in her mind like a looped nightmare. Everything inside her screamed for her to confront him, to demand answers, but a deeper instinct, the one honed by fear and betrayal, told her to stay quiet, to act normal. If Caleb really was working against her, she needed to be careful. Watching him was now more important than trusting him. She made the call to Dr. Hawthorne at 3:27 a.m., her voice low and calm, even as her heart pounded so hard she thought it might betray her. The man who answered didn't sound like a villain. His voice was tired, measured, like someone used to keeping secrets too heavy for one life to carry. He didn't deny anything. In fact, he confirmed her worst fears. "You weren't the only one, Lena," he said. "You were part of a batch. They called you the Echoes because each of you carried fragments of trauma, memory, behavior that could be redirected. Your sister, Elaine, she was part of it too. Only she got out." Lena stood by the window, barely hearing him over the roar of blood in her ears. The city outside suddenly felt hostile. Every lit window, every moving car, an eye watching her. "What do you mean she got out?" she asked, her voice cracking.
"She's dead."
"I buried her." "That wasn't supposed to happen," Hawthorne whispered. Elaine was their only failure. She remembered too much too quickly, and when she tried to expose them, they took her out. It was meant to look like an accident. But she'd already left something behind. Lena's breath caught. The voicemail. "Not just that," Hawthorne said. "There's a drive. A physical backup. Everything, names, data, the original tests, control logs. And the one person who can decrypt it is someone you already know." Lena didn't have to ask who. Her stomach turned as she pictured Caleb's face again, not as the friend who held her up through panic attacks and grief, but as the handler assigned to keep her from reaching the truth. The drive, if it existed, was now a ticking time bomb. If Caleb had it, and she suspected he did, then she had a limited window to act before he disappeared or destroyed it. She left the apartment before dawn, slipping out through the fire escape with only a backpack and the burner phone. The city was barely awake, but she couldn't risk the front door. Couldn't risk giving Caleb any hint she was onto him. As she ducked into a corner cafe to regroup, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You're not the only one who knows. Meet me at the transit station, platform 6, in 20 minutes. Come alone." Her instinct said it was a trap. But so far, instincts hadn't done much for her. She followed the lead, slipping into the early morning crowd like a ghost. The platform was nearly empty, just a woman in a dark hoodie and a man pacing with headphones. Then the woman turned, and Lena froze. It was Jordan, Elaine's old roommate. She hadn't seen her since the funeral. "Jordan?" Lena asked, her voice low and sharp with suspicion. "Why are you here? How did you even?" Jordan didn't waste time. She handed Lena a worn envelope. "Elaine gave this to me months ago. Told me not to open it unless something happened to her. I didn't understand at the time, but after what I saw last night, I knew it was time." Inside was a map of the facility where the Echo project had started. Coordinates, floor plans, access codes, everything. It had been archived under the name Project Dandelion, a backup site far outside the city limits. Elaine was planning to go there the week she died, Jordan said. She thought she could shut it down for good. Before Lena could respond, her phone buzzed again, another message, this time from Caleb. "We need to talk. Please. I know you saw the video." It's not what you think. Lena stared at the message for a long second. The betrayal burned, but now wasn't the time for anger. She needed answers, leverage, and that drive. If Caleb had a sliver of guilt or a hidden motive, she'd use it against him. But just as she was about to reply, she heard it. A loud pop, then chaos. People screamed. A figure in black pushed through the crowd and yanked Jordan backward, slamming her into the platform bench before disappearing down the tunnel. Lena chased after the attacker instinctively, heart hammering, dodging through panicked commuters. But the figure vanished into the maze of maintenance corridors before she could catch up. When she returned, Jordan was gone. So was the envelope. All that remained was a bloodstained shoe and Lena's rapidly unraveling reality. The scale of the conspiracy wasn't just corporate or governmental, it was generational. Buried in public institutions, weaponized through psychological testing, manipulated through false memories and tailored trauma. And Lena was no longer just a victim. She was the last piece in a puzzle they couldn't let anyone solve. She was officially out of time. And everyone, Caleb, Hawthorne, even Jordan, had their own secrets. One of them held the key to ending this. But another might kill her before she ever found it. Lena's pulse thundered in her ears as she crept through the abandoned psychiatric facility, her flashlight casting jittery shadows across cracked linoleum and peeling paint. The coordinates from the stolen files had led her to this decaying building in the outskirts of upstate New York, ground zero for Project Dandelion. The deeper she went, the more the silence felt engineered, too complete, like the building itself was waiting. Every step forward peeled away a layer of the person she thought she was, leaving raw instinct behind. She passed rusted surgical tools, sealed doors with claw marks on them, and faded observation logs scrawled with names, hers included. But it wasn't until she reached the lower levels that the full horror of the operation revealed itself. Room 41B had been sealed with biometric locks, but Lena still remembered her sister's access codes from the map. Inside, the walls were lined with video monitors, each screen flickering with time-stamped surveillance footage. Rows of patients, including Lena and Elaine, recorded over years, their daily routines tracked, manipulated, documented. There were files labeled Neuroecho Phase 2, Subject Behavior Overrides, and Total Cognitive Reframing. She opened a dusty laptop connected to the surveillance hub and found the core file, a detailed master control log of the program's intentions. This wasn't just trauma-based research. It was behavioral reprogramming, memory insertion, personality extraction. Project Dandelion wasn't a study, it was a lab for creating weaponized minds built from human grief and broken identities. The screens flared to life with a loud hum, and Lena turned to find Caleb standing in the doorway, eyes dark and unreadable, a gun loosely hanging at his side. He looked older now, like the weight of the truth had finally settled on his shoulders. "I told you not to come here," he said, his voice calm but tight. "You were never supposed to see this." Lena stared at him, trembling with fury and disbelief. "You watched us. You let them do this to Elaine."
To me.
"I tried to protect you," Caleb said, stepping forward. "You think I wanted this? I was embedded to monitor Subject Echo 6, yes. But I chose you. I warned Elaine. I tried to shut this down from the inside, but she pushed too hard. She didn't understand how far it went." Lena raised her flashlight like a weapon, even though her hands shook. "Then help me. Tell me where the drive is." He hesitated. "It's here. But if you release it, they'll come for you. There's no going back from this. These people, politicians, defense contractors, federal agencies, they will erase you. Not just kill you. Erase you." "I don't care," Lena said, tears brimming as her voice hardened. "They already erased Elaine. I'm not letting them take anything else." The lights suddenly cut out. A high-pitched alarm began blaring through the halls, echoing off the concrete like a countdown. Caleb spun, gun raised. "They're here." And to complicate things further, another body surfaced. A drifter found near a remote trailhead in Idaho, holding a notebook containing scribbled maps, cipher symbols, and a list of names. Elaine's was one of them. So was Lena's. No ID on the body. No fingerprints in the system. Just a backpack filled with strange, seemingly unrelated documents. But when the list of names was shown to a retired intelligence officer turned online consultant, he pointed to a curious pattern. Every name on the list had, at one point, been affiliated with or adjacent to decommissioned federal facilities under the Department of Defense's psychological trauma rehabilitation programs. Lena wasn't just a niece anymore. She was a target. And somewhere, buried in all the noise and manipulation, the truth was still waiting, cold, silent, and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. But the next clue would come from the unlikeliest place of all, inside Elaine's old radio, the one everyone had overlooked. Because sometimes the dead aren't trying to be found. The turning point came in the dead of night, when the air felt heavier than usual and the silence in Lena's apartment became unbearable, as if the walls themselves were listening. She had returned from the local records office in downtown Tacoma after spending hours poring through archival logs, looking for any mention of Site 27B or its shadowy connections to Elaine's past. Her eyes burned from strain, and her head throbbed with the weight of half-truths and dead ends. She was exhausted, running on caffeine and desperation, but something wouldn't let her sleep. She sat alone in the living room, the dim glow of her laptop screen the only light in the apartment, obsessively rewatching a corrupted video file pulled from Elaine's old USB drive. Just static, brief flashes of lights, and what sounded like a woman crying softly under white noise. But this time, her ears caught something else, a name. Her name. Muffled and quick. Lena, stop. The voice wasn't Elaine's. It wasn't anyone she recognized. The moment chilled her to her bones, but she didn't have time to process it. A loud crash shattered the silence. It came from the back hallway near her bedroom. She jumped up, adrenaline surging, heart pounding. Grabbing the heavy flashlight she kept near the kitchen sink, she crept forward, her breath catching as she reached the hall. The picture frames on the wall had been knocked to the floor. The glass cracked, some shattered completely. But the front door was still locked. The windows were shut. Nothing made sense. She checked every corner of the apartment. No one was there. And yet, the sense of being watched was overwhelming, as if someone had just exited moments before she arrived. It wasn't a break-in, it was a message. Lena didn't sleep that night. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a call from someone she hadn't heard from in years. Tommy Blake, a childhood friend who used to visit Elaine regularly when they were kids. He had been helping Lena quietly with research, feeding her old photos, memories, and contacts from their small-town days. But this call was different. His voice was trembling, panicked. "I think someone's been in my house," he whispered. "They took my dog. Left the door wide open. Nothing else missing. Just gone." Then came the static again. And then silence. Lena tried calling back, but the number was disconnected within minutes. It was then she realized she wasn't chasing a puzzle anymore. She was inside it. The walls were closing in and someone or something was pulling the strings from behind a curtain she couldn't even find. She began noticing the same silver sedan parked a few houses down every evening, with foggy windows and an outline of someone in the driver's seat. Whenever she moved toward it, the engine would start, and the car would disappear down the street. When she called the local police, they made a note of it but offered no follow-up. One officer even suggested she take a break from the internet when she mentioned the Site 27B file. That night, her router was fried by what an IT technician later described as an intentional power surge through the coaxial line. Her browsing history, the recovered files, the audio recordings gone. Wiped out completely. Someone had entered her home digitally, if not physically, and made it clear. They were watching. With every breath, Lena felt more alone, more trapped. Even the few allies she had, Tommy, a podcast host named Lex who had briefly covered the case, and a local librarian who flagged old news clippings for her, began pulling away. Lex ghosted her after a cryptic voicemail warning. "There's a line, Lena. Don't cross it." The librarian quit the very next day, leaving behind no forwarding address. Every time Lena found herself getting closer to something that resembled the truth, the trail would burn out, and someone in her circle would vanish, physically, emotionally, or by force. And yet, something inside her wouldn't let her stop. It wasn't just about Elaine anymore. It was about her own survival. Sleep came in short bursts, filled with dreams of drowning in white noise, hands pulling her downward, and a woman whispering codes into her ear. Her apartment felt like a prison, her phone a tracker, and the city around her, a maze built to keep her lost. The fear was no longer abstract. It had form. It had presence. It was real. And it wasn't just coming for her. It was already here. But the moment that made everything undeniably real came 3 nights later, when she returned home from a late grocery run and found her front door slightly ajar. Her breath froze in her throat. She stepped inside, every nerve on fire, her hands shaking as she reached for her phone to dial 911. But then she saw it, sitting on the center of her kitchen table, illuminated by the overhead bulb. Elaine's missing locket, the one police had never recovered. Its chain gleamed like it had just been polished, and tucked inside was a tiny scrap of paper. Just 5 words, in the same frantic handwriting from the earlier journal page. Don't trust the other Lena. She stared at the note in disbelief, her mind scrambling to make sense of it. Was it a code? A warning? Or was it something far more disturbing, suggesting she wasn't who she thought she was? That maybe someone else had taken her place, or that her memories had been manipulated. Her world, already cracking, began to fracture completely. She could feel it. The story she'd inherited wasn't just about a conspiracy. It was about identity, about memory, about the kind of fear that doesn't just haunt you, it replaces you. And for the first time, Lena wondered not just who was watching her, but who else might be inside her life, pretending to be her, rewriting her story from the inside out. Let me know when you're ready for the next part, where the paranoia deepens, reality slips, and Lena is forced to confront the terrifying idea that she may not be the only version of herself walking around. Flashing red lights illuminated the corridors as boots pounded above them. Lena lunged toward the main server rack, ripping out the drive while Caleb covered her. She wasn't sure if he was protecting her out of guilt, duty, or love, but at that moment, it didn't matter. They were both trapped in a story too big to undo. Gunfire shattered the air, and they sprinted into the maze of lower tunnels. Caleb took a hit to the shoulder but kept moving, dragging Lena toward an emergency hatch. She turned back only once, to see a figure standing silently in the surveillance room doorway. Dr. Reeve. His expression wasn't rage or fear. It was satisfaction, like he'd planned for this all along. Lena and Caleb emerged into the cold dawn air, breathless and bleeding. They drove for hours in silence, until Lena finally inserted the drive into an encrypted laptop in a rundown motel outside D.C. The files, thousands of them, detailed the entire operation, code names, funding routes, psychological blueprints. Everything. She uploaded the data to 3 secure servers and scheduled its release to multiple media outlets. Caleb, pale from blood loss, watched her, his hand trembling as he handed her a burner phone. You need to go off-grid now. Disappear, he whispered. But before she could respond, the motel TV flickered on by itself, static giving way to a recorded news bulletin, Lena's face on the screen, labeled as a national security threat. The voiceover claimed she'd stolen classified data and posed a danger to public safety. Her full name, last known location, and image were broadcast across every major network. That was when she knew. The final twist wasn't that the conspiracy was deeper than she thought. It was that she had never escaped it. The moment she found the truth, the system shifted again, recasting her as the villain. The world wouldn't believe her. They'd been programmed not to. She looked at Caleb, and he nodded grimly. It's begun. As helicopters roared in the distance and sirens screamed down the highway, Lena didn't run. She stepped outside into the morning light, one hand gripping the exposed drive, the other holding Caleb's bloodied hand. The truth was out there now, but so was the hunt. And somewhere in the echo chamber of control and chaos, a new version of her was being written. One where she was the threat, the monster, the experiment that refused to break. Lena sat alone on a cliff's edge overlooking the cold waters of the Pacific, the wind catching the edges of a worn leather journal in her lap. It had been 6 months since she leaked the Project Dandelion files, 6 months since she vanished from the motel under the cover of darkness, leaving behind a world that now considered her both a whistleblower and a fugitive. The media blitz that followed was everything she feared. Mainstream outlets quickly labeled the files a hoax, doctored content from a mentally unstable woman grieving her sister's death. Government spokespeople denied any connection, claiming national security protocols were violated and spinning every narrative possible to discredit her. But the documents still spread. Across encrypted channels, independent reporters, whistleblower platforms, and deep web forums, her name became a symbol, part urban legend, part truth, part revolution. People began to question what they'd long accepted. And though many still doubted, others started to see the cracks in the world around them. She still remembered the last night she saw Caleb. He'd insisted on splitting up, knowing his injuries made him a liability. He left her with a duffel bag of cash, burner tech, and a coded list of underground contacts, ghosts who'd once served the system and now fought to dismantle it. Their goodbye was unspoken, just a lingering look between two people who had bled for the truth and knew they might never meet again. Whether he made it or not, Lena would never know. She hadn't tried to find him. Some things were better left untouched, especially when the world believed you were already dead. And for the most part, she was. Lena Shaw, data analyst and grieving sister, no longer existed. The woman who survived was someone else entirely, shaped by secrets, loss, and a fire no one could put out. The journal in her lap was Elaine's, one of the only items she salvaged from the facility before it was erased by fire and denials. Flipping through its pages, Lena had come to understand her sister in ways she never could while she was alive. The entries weren't madness, as the doctors claimed. They were lucid, intentional. Elaine had known about the brain experiments, the false memories, the ways their childhood had been rewritten. And still, she fought to maintain her identity. She fought to protect Lena from knowing the full truth, believing that if one of them could live freely, it would be worth it. But Lena had made peace with that now. The only way to honor her sister's sacrifice was to ensure no one else would ever be manipulated into becoming someone they weren't. Still, not everything could be tied up neatly. The files she released caused ripples, but the people truly responsible, those whose names never appeared on official documents, remained untouchable, shielded by layers of influence and fear. There were rumors that Project Dandelion had evolved, been renamed, and relocated. That new subjects were being tested with even more subtle methods, augmented reality, predictive algorithms, synthetic personalities shaped by social media behavior. The future wasn't clean. It was more terrifying than anything Lena had imagined. But now she had allies. People who believed her. People who had seen the pattern. Across the country, anonymous sources continued feeding her proof. Patterns. Leaks. Discreet phone calls that ended before voices were heard. The conspiracy hadn't ended. It had simply adapted. But so had Lena. As the sun dipped below the horizon and bathed the cliffs in orange fire, Lena stood, letting the wind rip pages from the journal one by one. They scattered like birds across the sky, her past released, piece by piece. Somewhere out there, others were reading the truth for the first time. Somewhere, someone else was preparing to fight. She may never be able to go back to who she was, but that was the cost of clarity, of choosing truth over safety. And just before turning to walk back into the woods, her encrypted phone buzzed once. A single message appeared. Phase 3 initiated. You were right. They're not done. There was no name, no traceable signature, but Lena felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. Not fear, certainty. She wasn't alone anymore. The last thing the audience sees is her fading silhouette against the horizon as her voice echoes in the wind. They tried to erase me. But some stories rewrite themselves.